The moment she looked up at me across that white-clothed table, coffee steaming between us, eyes carrying something ancient and unspoken, I felt it, the unmistakable weight of a person who had learned to hold an entire ocean inside themselves without letting a single drop spill. I didn't, and apost know then that asking one simple question would crack open a story that would change the way I understood loneliness, love, and what it truly means to survive. Her name was Serena. I had met her 3 weeks earlier at a mutual friend and apost gathering, one of those polished rooftop events in the city where everyone is performing a version of themselves they wish were real. She stood apart from the crowd, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in the quiet, deliberate way of someone who had simply stopped pretending. She was wearing a pale blue dress that evening too, and I remember thinking she looked like someone caught between two worlds, beautiful enough to belong anywhere, yet somehow deeply elsewhere. We exchanged numbers that night, casually, the way adults do when they sense something worth exploring but aren't an apost yet willing to admit it. She texted first, which surprised me. She suggested coffee. I said yes before I even finished reading the message. So there we were, at an outdoor cafe in the middle of the city, surrounded by the blur of strangers and the soft city noise of a Tuesday afternoon. We talked easily, about work, about books, about the...
You're watching Wake Up Files, where every story carries a message of hope, kindness, and unexpected miracles. If you believe one story can inspire millions, press like, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Wake Up Files so you never miss a story like this.
Strange comedy of modern life. She laughed with her whole face, unguarded, genuine. But beneath it, beneath every clever sentence and warm smile, I kept sensing something she was carefully navigating around. A room inside her she wasn't, and a post opening. I noticed how she never once mentioned a relationship. Not a past one, not a current one. Not even a casual reference to a date gone wrong, or a situationship that dissolved. Nothing. Just a quiet, elegant blankness where that part of most people and apost stories usually lives. It was on and apost my place. I knew that. But somewhere between the second cup of coffee and a shared moment of comfortable silence, I asked anyway. I told her I hoped it wasn't an apost too forward, that she didn't an apost have to answer, but I had noticed. Gently. I hoped that she seemed like someone who an apost been on her own for a while. I asked how long it had been since she an apost let someone in. She went still, not stiff or offended. Just still. The way a lake goes still before a storm rolls in from the hills. She looked down at her cup for a long moment, tracing the rim with her fingertip, and then she said it. Quietly. Simply. Without any of the drama the words deserved. She said she had been alone for 6 years. I waited. I didn't an apost fill the silence with reassurance or fumble to lighten the moment. I just waited, because something in her posture told me she was deciding whether I was worth the truth. And then she looked up at me, really looked at me, and said, "And Quat, do you actually want to know why?" And Quat, I told her yes. What she said next was not what I expected. I had assumed heartbreak. I had assumed betrayal. Some man who had shattered her so thoroughly she in a post rebuilt herself behind glass. I was prepared for that story. I had even preloaded a version of sympathy for it. But that was on, and a post what she said. Serena looked at me with those steady, careful eyes and told me that 6 years ago she had nearly disappeared. Not from a relationship ending, from herself ending. She had been in what she described as a long, slow collapse. From the outside, it had looked like success. A demanding career, a beautiful apartment, a full social calendar, a partner who checked every box the world said mattered. But on the inside, she had been fracturing quietly for years. She had been so consumed with being everything everyone needed her to be that she had hollowed herself out entirely. She poured into her relationship, her job, her family and opposed expectations, her friends and opposed crises. And one morning she woke up and realized she had no idea who she was without the weight of other people and opposed needs pressing her into shape. The relationship ended, not in fire, but in a long, sad exhale. Her partner wasn't an opposed villain. That, she said, was almost the hardest part. It would have been easier if he had been. Instead, he was simply someone who had unknowingly loved the performance of her and never thought to ask what was underneath it. When she finally stopped performing, there was nothing left between them. Just two people who had confused proximity for intimacy and routine for love. After he left, she said, she sat on the floor of her apartment for 3 hours. Not crying, just sitting. And in that silence, she heard something she hadn't and apost heard in years. The faint, terrified, barely alive sound of her own self, calling out from somewhere deep inside all the rubble. She said it sounded like a person who had been buried alive and had just started to believe rescue might still be possible. That was when she made a decision that most people would never understand and even fewer would respect. She decided to be alone, not as punishment, not out of fear, but as a deliberate, almost sacred act of reconstruction. She stepped away from dating entirely. She reduced her social obligations. She quit the job that had been eating her alive and spent 4 months doing almost nothing, reading, walking, sitting in cafes alone, learning to be in her own company without the constant hum of productivity and performance to drown out the silence. She said those first months were the hardest thing she had ever done. Loneliness, real loneliness, she told me, has a sound. It hums. It presses against your chest at night. It makes you reach for your phone 100 times a day just to feel like you exist to someone. But she didn't, and apost reach for it. She sat with the hum. She let it be there. And slowly, achingly, impossibly slowly, she began to hear other things beneath it. She rediscovered a love of painting she had abandoned at 19 because someone told her it wasn't and apost practical. She started cooking elaborate meals for herself, not out of loneliness but out of genuine pleasure. She began therapy, real therapy, not the kind where you perform insight for 50 minutes and leave feeling productive, but the kind that made her ugly cry on the drive home and dream in symbols and come back the following week anyway. She built a life she actually recognized as her own, small and unspectacular to the outside world, but hers, all the way down to the And then, she said, something unexpected happened. She stopped being lonely. Not because she filled the emptiness with people, but because she finally became someone she genuinely wanted to spend time with. She had stopped being a stranger to herself. And a person who is no longer a stranger to themselves, she told me quietly, is never truly alone. She had dated a little over the years, a dinner here, a few conversations there. But she had walked away from each one not out of sadness or damage but out of clarity. She knew what she was worth now. She knew the texture of real connection versus the anxious, performing, people-pleasing imitation of it she had mistaken for love most of her adult life. She wasn't and apost waiting for someone to complete her. She was waiting, if waiting was even the right word, for someone who could actually see her. All of her. Not just the composed, articulate, blue-dressed version across the cafe table, but the woman who had sat on the floor for 3 hours and chosen herself in the ruins of everything she thought she was supposed to want. I sat across from her and felt something shift inside me. I had come to this coffee meeting with the low, half-conscious agenda of someone who thought he might be charming enough to matter to a beautiful woman. I left it feeling quietly humbled by someone who had done the hardest work a human being can do, the long, unglamorous, entirely invisible work of becoming real. I didn't an apost ask her for a second date that afternoon. I didn't an apost reach across the table or say anything poetic. I just told her, as plainly and honestly as I could, that what she had shared was one of the most extraordinary things anyone had ever told me, and that I was grateful she trusted me with it. She smiled, small, private, true, and said she wasn't an apost sure why she had. Maybe because I had asked and then actually waited for the answer. She said most people ask questions but are really just waiting to speak again. She said she had noticed I wasn't an apost doing that. We walked out into the afternoon city together, two people who had started the day as strangers and ended it as something less easily defined. I watched her disappear into the crowd, that pale blue dress moving through the blur of the city, and I thought about all the people passing around her who would never know that the quiet woman in the cafe had once been buried alive inside herself and had dug her way out with nothing but time, honesty, and the terrifying courage to be still. If this story moved something inside you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or perhaps of a version of yourself you and apost are still excavating, please consider leaving a like on this video. It costs nothing, but it tells us that stories like this one matter, that real human truth still has a place in this noise. Your support keeps these stories alive and reaching the people who need them most. And before we close, I want to ask you something in the comments. Have you ever chosen to be alone not out of pain, but out of self-preservation? What did that time teach you? Tell us below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today.